A.V. Rajwade, one of the most respected voices in the markets as well as in the currency markets, joins us right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Rajwade. Before we go into what is expected in the currencies, I just want your broader views, because we've had you after the budget, broad view on the budget. Is this, one of our reporters was telling us that in Parliament, Sonia Gandhi came out and she was asked, what is your view on the budget? And she said, it's not a game changer, it's a name changer. Do you agree with that?
Broadly speaking, yes. But I think the new government probably has had, just about a month and a half before the budget came out. But yes, I think it's a continuation and no major change. I think we'll probably have to wait for the 15-16 budget to really look at what the NDA agenda is. Meantime, I was...
with due respect, sir, I just want to interrupt just for a second there.
Sort of concerned about...
The entire team, the Modi team, was preparing to be in power from sometime in 2013. So to say that they just got 60 days, 45 days, is it really that fair? They've been tracking, all this data is in the public domain. The budget was out, the interim budget was out in February. They've been tracking everything. They surely had some plan.
I think the planning probably would have started only after the appointment of the finance minister. And I'm not too sure that who is going to head the finance ministry or the ministry allotments had been done when Mr. Modi was declared as their prime ministerial candidate. That happened quite some time back. But I'm not sure that the portfolio allocations and so on, it would have been completely premature to do it at that point of time. So I think it would still be fair to say that they got only about a month and a half.
A month and a half and in fact, one of the things that the only thing that the market seemed to be happy about was that the fiscal deficit number of 4.1. It's still not very clear whether he said that 4.1 is going to be achieved or he thinks 4.5 is easier to achieve. But, this is a question that I was asking on budget day to Naina Lal Kidwai, that are we facing a bit of fiscal responsibility Taliban in this country? Is it really necessary to have 4.1%?
Well, I probably wouldn't use the word Taliban, but I am right in the thrust of your question, namely that I think we are placing too much emphasis on that number of fiscal, and it's not just 4.1. He's talking of 3.6 in the next fiscal year and 3.2 or something in the following year. Now, if you have been seeing, the ratio of government debt to the nominal GDP, which is generally considered to be a fair indicator of the debt servicing ability, that has been falling year after year after year, because nominal GDP has been growing much faster than the government debt. We have had fiscal deficits of 4, 5, even 6%, but inflation in effect devalues the outstanding debt. So therefore, that ratio, which was, my memory is, it was about 65, 7 or 8 years back, is now down to about 50, 52. And the generally accepted level where people get concerned about the level of fiscal deficits is internationally accepted is about 90%. We are far away from that. Now, I can't understand sort of this quasi-religious, you call it Talibanese, pursuit of that single number. I think what is much more worrying is not so much the quantity of the fiscal deficit as the quality. And I think there has been nothing in the budget towards the improving the quality of that budget. In the sense, is the deficit caused primarily by capital investments, or is it being caused by expenditure, revenue expenditure? And I think in our case, it is the revenue expenditure and not the capital expenditure that is really the underlying clause. And that's why I said the focus needs to be not so much on the quantity as on the quality, that investments need to go up, which really hasn't happened in this budget. Subsidies have continued as they are, and I think to that extent, it is, as somebody said, Chidambaram's budget only read by Mr. Jaitley.
Mr. Rajwade, good morning, sir. Prashant here. So, budget presented earlier by a South Indian lawyer, now a North Indian lawyer. That's essentially the difference that you were alluding to, I guess. I just want to ask you, why so much focus? You know, there is also the absolute level of the fiscal deficit being curtailed at 4.1, 3.6, 3.2, etc. Because, I mean, then you're saying that at an aggregate level, spending is actually at a peak and it has to fall from here, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. That could be revenue expenditure, that could be capital expenditure.
Yes, expenditure should fall, but capital investment should go up, and revenue expenditure needs to be contained. That's my argument. And the fiscal deficit, I think we have enough maneuverability in terms of what the actual number can go to, or we need to be worried about it. I think we are taking the rating companies perhaps too seriously, despite the fact that their record on sovereign debt crisis has been extremely poor. They didn't predict East Asia. They could not predict the Greek crisis until it was too late. So I think their record in general on fiscal deficits has been, and generally, the debt servicing ability of a sovereign has been pretty poor. And I'm not too sure whether we are not giving them too much importance to for them to rule the magic number of fiscal deficit.
But why are we, you know, this is a government which has got a majority. It's supposedly a very strong government, decisive government. Why isn't it standing up to rating agencies? And as you say, doing the right thing?
I think, well, to an extent, I think they are sort of prisoners of what has happened in the past. You can't suddenly change everything. There has to be a continuity. But I think this focus on fiscal deficit, both of Mr. Chidambaram earlier and that magic number, is, in my view, a misplaced priority. And I think they're not looking at the fact that total government debt as a proportion of nominal GDP has been falling year after year after year. So what are we worried about so much? We should be worried about not so much the quantity, as I said, we need to worry about quality. If growth is the objective, and he is talking of 7-8% growth. In fact, there is an impossible trinity in macroeconomics. And I think he's talking of another impossible trinity. He wants 7-8% growth. He wants to cut budget deficit and to contain CAD. Now that CAD has been so ingrained in us, current account deficit, that we can't even think of current account balance, let alone a current account surplus. And I think what's happening is that, unfortunately, conventional thinking seems to have overtaken the the finance minister's way of looking at things. And I think the much bigger worry is the fact that our net external liabilities are one of the highest in the world today at 18% of GDP. They have grown from 4% to 18% in the last 5 years. And we still talk of CADs being a sort of God-given thing. We can do nothing about it. We don't look at the trade deficit as an output loss, as an employment loss, as a GDP growth loss. So I think there is probably a lot of fresh thinking is needed, which was not evident in the budget in any case.
Mr. Rajwade, since the early 90s, if one looks at the way global capitalism has been working, The rate of corporate profit seems to have been boosted largely by central banks coming in by keeping interest rates low. Inflation has been broadly kept in check to keep nominal wages low, and real wages have not grown. This has allowed corporate profits to increase, and that has been a driver of both finance capital as well as growth in the developed world. And we've also seen the alternate model where spending has been done by certain countries, especially Latin American countries, on the poor to boost demand. I heard you say that it is important for us to increase investment, capital investment by the government, and reduce expenditure. Is there a case to actually say that even expenditure is good, even non-plan expenditure through subsidies is good, as long as it boosts demand in a country like ours, which is demand constrained?
Well, I would not compare ourselves. I would not like to take the examples of either the developed countries, which you rightly characterized. It is the monetary policy that is driving corporate profitability and so on, nor of the Latin American countries with their very poor record of consistent growth. I think what we need to learn is much closer to where we are geographically located, namely from East Asia. I mean, how has East Asia grown? I mean, it is not just China, but before that it was Japan, before that, after that it was Korea and Taiwan, then Thailand, Malaysia, and of course the most spectacular being China. And I think what they have grown on is not on fiscal deficits, but basically on a lot of, most of them had undervalued currencies at a given point of time, and a rapid growth in manufacturing based on global markets. That's how these countries have attained miraculous growth rates and have come out of poverty so fast. I think we need to learn much more from Beijing and Seoul and the Taiwanese capital rather than from Washington.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're essentially talking about an export-led growth with a depreciated or a lower, a weak currency. Are you saying that the rupee should be weaker and kept weaker the way in which China managed to do that?
I'm certainly, most certainly in favor of that. And I think this is also reflected in the fact that most of our businessmen consider foreign currency debt to be cheaper than rupee debt. Now, why do they consider that? Because they believe, and their experience of the last many years proves that they are right, is that the rupee does not depreciate to the extent of domestic inflation. So therefore, it is much cheaper to service foreign currency debt than it is to service rupee debt. And we seem to be encouraging that.
So what according to you,
sure that
what according to you would be a fair value of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar? If one had to look just the rupee dollar, what would you say? What would be a fair value?
Well, fair value in terms of sort of balancing our trade account probably would need to be nearer 70 rather than 60.
Nearer 70. But what happens to the
the
oil
RBI's
import
own RBI's.
Sorry, complete your
Well,
train of
oil
thoughts.
imports. Let's look at it. Yeah, I'll come to the issue of oil imports and oil subsidies in a moment. But yes, we may have to face the possibility of higher inflation for some time. Yes, that's a reality. But if we want growth, that's why I talked of the impossible trinity, that lower inflation, lower fiscal deficit and 7-8% growth, which the finance minister talked about, to me looks like an impossible trinity. Now, coming back to the question of yes, the cost of oil and oil products will go up, but I think that will also force much greater conservation efforts than would be evident through subsidized prices of all these a lot of, one keeps hearing in the papers, one never gets official data on that. A lot of kerosene is smuggled to Bangladesh. Pakistan has higher prices, Bangladesh has higher prices, and their per capita incomes are no better than us. In fact, my memory is Bangladesh is lower. But if they can afford it, because one way of conserving is to make something costlier.
One of the reasons why the oil import bill reflects in higher domestic prices is also because of the oil pricing mechanism that we have. We've just had a CAG report a couple of days ago saying that refiners have gained anywhere between 27,000 to 50,000 crores between 2007 to 2012 because of that oil pricing mechanism. The import parity, the countervailing duty, the 2 rupees marketing cost, all that adds up, and finally consumers pay much more than what the import landed cost of petrol would have been. Do you think that there is a case to rework the oil pricing mechanism as well, the petrol pricing mechanism within the country?
Well, frankly, I have looked at the headlines of that CAG report. I've also seen some committee or economist recommending that we should go to the export pricing basis. Frankly, I must tell you that I haven't really studied the question, and I do not like to comment on something which I have not gone into the details of.
Right. So, essentially what you're saying is we have the same regime what we had, just to sort of summarize, that we had under Mr. Chidambaram, right? I mean, the focus and the thrust essentially is the same. So which of these three of the, what you call the impossible trinity, do you think will be achieved and which will be missed if the government continues to follow this path? Because by definition, impossible trinity, all can't be achieved.
True. I think in order of what could fail, probably the growth target, what they are looking at 5.4 to 5.9 in the current fiscal year, 7, 8, a couple of years down the line. That's number one. Number two, if somebody has a strong will, as Mr. Chidambaram had, by a lot of creative accounting, those numbers can be met. But remember, with that creative accounting, we are merely postponing that expenditure. I think a lot of that creative accounting has been done in achieving the budget targets, and I don't think that that's a very feasible or a sustainable way of achieving those targets. Now, as I said, I think some sort of hard decisions will need to be taken about the because there are any number of studies which suggest that the subsidies are not going to the people to whom they are really supposed to be going. In fact, Rajiv Gandhi at one stage had said that only perhaps 15-20% reaches the poor for whom a lot of those subsidies are meant. So I think, do we have the administrative efficiency and administrative machinery to be able to implement all those subsidy schemes, the social security schemes that, the intentions may be good, but I don't think that we have either the administrative capability or the efficiency to deliver those subsidies to those who really need it. Meantime, the money is just getting wasted probably.
So essentially what you're saying is the first casualty, if the government continues down this path, is going to be growth, right? This growth target won't be met.
In my view,
That's
yes,
growth will be the
may not be met, and then no. But as I said, I still am hopeful that by the time the 15-16 budget comes up, which is not too far from now, say about 6 months, 6-7 months from now, I think by that time the ministers would have had a much better handle much better control, much better idea of what's happening, what needs to be done. So I think we need to give them a little more time before we just look at it as a continuation of UPA 2. But yes, as far as the current year is concerned, it is a continuation.
So the message from New Delhi to Mint Street, right? I mean, what we sort of pick up is that New Delhi wants a stronger rupee, not a weaker rupee. That seems to be the message. What you outlined is that, well, rupee should be, if you want to balance the trade account, rupee should be 70, not where it is now. So it seems to be in complete variance.
Absolutely. Yes, it is. And I mean, I make no apologies for it. Even the RBI's own indices are showing how much the rupee is overvalued. I mean, I don't need to sort of put in my own figure, their own numbers. I mean, although I have some quarrels with the way they calculate the index, but even then, the CPI-based index which they came out with, I think that showed that in 13-14, on an average, the rupee was overvalued by one measure is 12%, another measure is 18%. So I think it is not just I who am saying it. The government would probably like a stronger rupee because that reduces subsidies. Hopefully it reduces inflation. I think even on inflation and the Urjit Patel committee report and so on and so forth, sort of my views are rather heretic on that subject. I'm not a great advocate of lower inflation at any cost. In fact, in many ways, inflation is a demographic phenomenon. The younger a population, higher the inflation. I think the direct contrast to India is probably Japan, where for the last 2 decades, with an aging population, with an ever-growing proportion of retirees to the working age population, they are in a deflationary age. Prices are falling, they are not rising. The government would like them to rise, but they don't rise. I think why? Because the age profile is completely different. Our age profile is completely different. And I think we have to accept that until population stabilizes, unless sort of the number of people coming into the job market stabilizes, I think we are going to have higher inflation. Else, we can bring about a much lower inflation only at the cost of a far tighter monetary policy, which would also mean much lower growth.
I got that, sir. Mr. Rajwade, thanks very much for coming in. Very interesting conversation as always, sir. And we do look forward to hearing from you every time that you're with us. Thank you very much.